Hi, I'm Craig Herndon. I'm from Boston Virtual Reality.
And I'm Neil Gupta from Boston Augmented Reality.
And you're listening to the Virtuality Podcast. And here we are with our midnight interview with Morph 3D. So here we have Ben Hesson, and we also have Jesse Janzer. So Ben, if you just want to go ahead and introduce yourself and describe your role at Morph 3D.
Like you said, my name is Ben Hesson. I am the lead engineer on the Ready Room project. And I handle, for the most part, the virtual and augmented reality demonstrations that we do, showing off our Morph 3D products and the type of technology that we're trying to offer to the virtual and augmented reality space.
Nice. So moving over to Jesse.
Hey, I'm Jesse Janzer. I'm the lead developer of the Morph character system. It's sort of the back-end piece of what Ready Room utilizes, and it's an avatar that is dynamic and morphable and is currently available as a Unity plugin, and that's where we are.
Nice. So let's go ahead into what does Morph 3D platform look like, and how does it apply to the VR AR space? So for people who aren't familiar with Morph 3D, how would you describe it?
So Morph is actually a pretty diverse system, actually. We originally started as just an avatar piece, and that was taken from our sister company, Daz 3D, and we took some of the existing assets out of that, and we made Morph 3D. And as VR was growing, we realized there was a huge market for it. So we started investing heavily into building VR and AR potential. And our original avatar system wasn't really capable of that. And so we've moved it into something that is capable of it. And so now we've sort of branched into three main pieces. So there's the Morph Character System, or MCS. There is Ready Room, and there's Artist Tools. And they all serve different crowds and niches, and that's probably a good example of what that system is.
Yeah, I mean the MCS system is geared more towards developers, right? You're going to have somebody that's going to be making a game, and they're going to use MCS. Right now, it's a Unity plugin. We hope to expand that here soon, and we're going to release a version of it for Unreal, and then hopefully eventually other game engines after that. Like you talked about, our artist tool toolkit is a program that essentially artists are able to create custom content and then import that into the Morph character system. So you could have a team of a developer and an artist making a game or an experience, and they're able, between the two of them, to go and put custom content, a custom avatar, in whatever they're trying to create. And then, like Jesse said, the Ready Room is kind of the nexus of that, and it's a perfect use case of using the back-end MCS system and this functionality that we can have dynamic avatars. And then we've taken that a step further, and we thought, well, if we can have dynamic avatars, the VR space is a perfect opportunity for us to really showcase those avatars and give people, not just developers and artists like our previous tool set has catered to, but your everyday user, the chance to be a creator, to be somebody who can create a custom avatar that represents them, that they can use in a social VR space.
If we take a step back and look at Morph 3D, because you're constantly saying, like, we just knew we had to go into VR. And so now the question is, like, why? So I have a hunch. I'll let you elaborate on, like, your reason why VR is so important and why Morph 3D feels like this gap in that space. So my hunch is that when we talk about VR, it's a virtual reality, not virtual delusion or any other kind of thing. We're trying to recreate reality just like the holodeck and immerse ourselves in this environment. But with that, we are taking ourselves, our culture, our views, and you have all these different ways of expressing yourself with clothes, with shoes, with even just how your hair looks all says something about you. And we do that in the real world. So of course we want to do that in the virtual world. So it seems to me like the very strong piece of why you're so interested in VR is to be able to express your own identity in the virtual world, and in a way like finding your own virtuality.
Yeah, that's actually very that's extremely accurate. So in fact, we even called one of our products that we're currently building, it's currently in development, and Ready Room actually utilizes it today, which is called Morph ID. And Morph ID, the reason why it's ID is identity. So the avatars, we kind of knew that people wanted to have a certain look. Like maybe you really, whether that's accurate to a representation of how you actually look in real life or not, it's sort of irrelevant. It's how you want to be perceived in whether it's a hyper-realistic world or whether you're fighting aliens on a spaceship. It doesn't really matter. But one of the nice things about that is that you're able to build a character that represents you regardless of the universe or world that you might want to go into. So if you want to go into a fantasy game and maybe it's your thing where you always wear a red shirt, maybe that you love red shirts, maybe you always have a certain style, you could wear that red shirt and maybe it's a tunic in a fantasy game. You go on Star Trek and, well, you're red shirt, so it's probably a bad situation to be wearing a red shirt on Star Trek. But that's sort of the vision where Morph ID is taking, and we're starting to demonstrate it today, and it's just going to grow.
So one thing that really interests me about what Morph's is doing is you have right now you have two different styles. So one's like a hyper realistic, and the other that you're using with VR chat is this cartoony kind of look. And it sounds to me like you want to build in more styles. And so, what do you see people like coming in and be like, well, having the cartoon style is always my identity. So does that style transfer over into a game that's like now realistic? Or do you think avatars are going to have to adapt to the style of the universe that they're going into or place that they're going into?
From a technological standpoint, it's actually very difficult, right? So if you let's break it down into, let's say you have a comic book character, or let's go even further and let's say you have a branded identity. So picture any popular cartoon of today. If we were to make a figure that has that sort of t-shirt and we want to transfer it to a realistic world, there are cases where we could make it happen, and there are cases where if you just did a mirror image of it, it doesn't look right? Like you can't take the Simpsons t-shirt and put it in real life. There's something wrong about it. In fact, like the style that you're referring to for Nikkei, we have different assets for it. And we can create analogs. And what the analogs will do is, when I talked specifically about a shirt earlier, maybe it's not the same, but it's the same kind of vision or spirit that you want to go after. Because from even from an artistic viewpoint, it's really hard to nail that stuff. And we know by doing that automatic transfer, we might hit issues like Uncanny Valley, where it's like, you look really hyper realistic, but your t-shirt does not. Like, your t-shirt looks like it came out of Minecraft, but you look like you came out of Witcher. It's like there's some oddity going in. So there are places where we can solve that problem from a technical level, and there are also places where we can solve it from an artistic level. Like, there's nothing particularly difficult from going from a contemporary world and taking that into a world that's 20 years in the future, right? Like, yep. you could pull it off, and it's sort of a challenge to hit all those parts.
Yeah. Ben, have you had a few more minutes to think about it?
I agree with everything that Jesse said. And I think from a technical standpoint, it's something that we can solve. And in my mind, it's more of an artistic problem. And I think there's multiple ways to solve it. And we're working on giving users and developers and artists the ability to have multiple ways to solve that problem. So if I have a world where somebody's wearing a monocle and then they go into somebody else's world, well, maybe monocle's not allowed. And so maybe the developer of that world decided that if people are coming in with a monocle, now they get an eye patch, right? But then you as a user, maybe you have the option to remove that eye patch, right? There's nothing that says you can't. And but then I could also see this world like from a technical standpoint. I think that we can make the style transfer work, but like Jesse pointed out, artistically, it's not always going to look great. It's not always going to work. And so then in my mind at that point, it's going to require manual hand tweaking from artists to go and make those things work, which I fully believe that we need to support and we will support, so that you can start to have these transfers and everything can kind of seem like it's all kind of glued together.
Yeah, and as far as I know about Morph 3D, that you actually do have a community of artists that are actively building clothes and stuff for the Morph, and a few of them are even making a pretty good living just selling those clothes through Morph 3D. So what is Morph doing to try and build out that artist community?
Yeah, the artist community that you're talking about right now is through Daz 3D. And Daz 3D has, last I checked, I think there's 600 active artists. Some of them, that's their full-time job. So their full-time job is to go create whatever they want. It doesn't really matter. Some of these people create diverse environments or fantasy or whatever, and they are very, very passionate about it. And the nice thing is they can do it for their living. And Daz has succeeded extremely well. They've done very, very well at nailing this market and getting people on board and building a really good product to deliver this. We had technical challenges of these are models that are done in ZBrush and they're done in high-end tools, and they have very, very difficult problems that in a non-real-time environment don't matter. And so getting some of these artists to make real-time work was actually really difficult, because some of these people have never even bothered or tried or had any interest in games. And for some of these people, they saw, oh, well, we know Daz makes money. We enjoy the money part, and Morph can make money too. And it's another avenue for those people to make a living or go in. And the nice thing for Morph is we've just started opening this part. So we have an existing content that we released. I think the original numbers were somewhere around 100 or something like that of assets that are available that you can go download and buy today. And we're just starting to expand that. And we're getting our first artists that have never done this work before. Yeah. And they're submitting that content through, and they're using our existing tools, like artist tools, to be able to produce that. And a lot of that is education both for us and for those artists. And we have brought on board, in fact, there's even some of our current employees work for Disney Interactive. If anybody's interested in that kind of stuff, they can go talk to Jeff and Wes at Morph 3D, and they're very, very, very talented. And they're starting to produce content that demonstrates how to do this, because some of the stuff is not easy. It's really hard to go from going, I have no budget and I can have 250,000 polys, to I've got, like I want to have an asset that might work on a mobile game, and maybe my limit's 800 or 1,000 or 2,000. And I think we're getting there. And I think there's an ecosystem that we can tap from our current existing artists, and then there's a new wave of people that are really interested in making money, or small studios that just want internal content for their own games, and that's sort of where that's going.
Are there any kind of incentives that artists have to work with Daz or Morph 3D?
Yeah, so in the past, when artists are submitting to Daz and to now submitting to Morph, throughout the history of the company, we've set aside millions to buy assets from artists. And that's just one of the ways that we have content through the store, and the other is through types of rev share with an artist. And so historically, we've had artists who, like Jesse talked about, have made a living by being artists through the DAZ network. And we are planning on expanding that in the future. And we're going to make sure that Morph is a major part of that.
How do you see the community growing? Do you think it involves a relationship between more developers needing these assets for VR type content? Or do you see the artists, just putting enough content out there? Like, it clearly has to have a place to be used.
Right.
So what's going to grow it?
Yeah, so I think that actually that sets it up really well for where we plan to take, for example, our Ready Room platform. Right now, Ready Room is an example of what we hope other developers will be able to create. And what we're showing with Ready Room is, it's the classic case of what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? We're putting out our Ready Room product as a way of generating excitement and getting things on board. We're putting in our resources first to make sure that that the system gets built and that there's users there to take advantage of it. And as a result, we hope that developers will get on board. And as more developers get on board, then we hope that more artists will get on board. And then as more artists get on board, more developers will get on board. And then the system will just continue to grow itself. And so our push for Ready Room right now is to get that going, so that we can start to add more platforms onto our portal system. Right now, we support VR chat and high fidelity, and we're planning on expanding that to be able to go to more partner destinations. So then it's even more of an incentive for artists to create things, and it becomes more of an incentive for developers because then there's more content for them to put into their games. And so it's just, we hope the snowball effect will start.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting aspects that come into play. So if you're an artist, let's say you just want to make money, and you can look at, and if you're smart, you'll look at there and see where there's holes. You'll see, oh, there's no content in this area, but it's really popular genre. I can go produce this stuff, and I know I'll make money because there's a user base that's growing. And if you're a developer, you can, and maybe you have no artists. Maybe you don't have a budget for this. And so we've tried to hit different niches. We've tried to hit a development community niche. We've tried to hit an artistic community niche. And we've tried to hit basically like high-end hobbyists and prosumers and consumers that they're not a developer, they're not an artist. They just want to consume our product and get a good-looking avatar and be able to walk into the platform or the application of their choice. And so there's a little bit of, we're trying to appease several different crowds. And we've kind of nailed the development community a bit, and we're focusing now heavily on artists. And as we get more platforms on board, which is going to get easier, we're going to produce an application and a documentation on how to get your own game. If you produce a game today, we will ship a SDK that you can integrate with, where you don't have to come talk to us. You don't have to license anything with us. You can just integrate, and your portal shows up in our world. And as we get more and more people on board, it's sort of that platform or viral effect of there's an incentive to be on this ecosystem because you can get customers from it. And so it's kind of a self-growing community. And I guess that's about it.
What kind of skill sets are you looking for in these artists?
Ooh, that's tricky. Ideally, you are just enthusiastic. I think I guess that at my heart, that's sort of, as a developer myself, I care most about enthusiasm. So if you're just passionate, I think you'll succeed. And I think for these particular artists, we're interested mostly in people that can model. If you are comfortable with Blender or Maya or ZBrush or whatever that tool of choice, we will help you achieve that, either through our current DAZ community or through our Morph community. We'll both be producing documentation on what do I need to do if all I modeled was high-end graphics? What do I need to do to model stuff for a game or stuff for a practical application? And so we'll start building some of that tooling to make it easier for people. So that's why I'm you just need to be enthusiastic and we'll help you out. If you reach out to anyone at Morph, we would love just to see what you offer.
Yeah, and we're also, I mean, currently in the process of setting up very specific specifications that artists can kind of go against and use that as a guideline of, okay, I'm an artist, I want my content to be available in VR or in mobile, and so these are the certain specifications on polygon count that I need. This is how many submeshes I can have. This is these are the types of materials that I can use. And so we're putting that together and then creating, like Jesse said, more documentation, and with our Artist Tools product, creating more tutorials and videos on how to use these tools and make it easier and easier, because ideally we want it to be a place where you don't have to be this professional with 20 years of experience 3D modeling and you're the only one that can do this thing. No, we want to make it easier and easier for any artist who has enthusiasm and wants to get into it to be able to be part of the system.
Yeah, I think that's also another thing too, where as we're expanding our concept of what we call style, I think you might not be interested in creating photorealistic assets. Maybe that's just not your thing. Maybe you're really into anime or comic books, or you're really into dragons or Star Trek or stuff like that. You can create assets specifically for that. And whether you're building it for your own game or someone else, or you're contracted, or you want to sell that, there's going to be a place there for you. And as our styles expand, we will have a niche that we hope that like you as an artist will go in and fill and be happy. And you don't have to go do some boring asset just because it sells well, because we'll have a diverse group that hopefully will all sell well.
Right. And so what if there's a need on the developer side for like certain types of assets or maybe a certain style? Are you guys considering any kind of bounty board for artists to go after if they're, they've hit their creative block and are looking for what do people actually need? And because you want to create something, people are going to use. So if you know right away people need this, maybe that's a way for, developers and artists to be able to interact with each other.
Yeah, I actually think that's actually a fabulous idea. I mean, if we were allowed to steal it, we might.
All yours.
I think generally from the DAS community, it's really diverse. So in that case, like we have things like hot dog stands. Like you can literally go buy a hot dog stand and it's really well done, really well done.
And I do often.
And there are niches that we know sell well, and there are niches that don't sell well, and it's a really hard thing to do. And I don't know how we could go about it in a fair way, I guess. But I think if we, from a development standpoint, like I know we could automate that.
Well, right.
It's a very good idea.
And maybe it's not like one dev. Maybe one dev poses the idea, but then you have 100 votes come in and say, yes, I want this. So now you have like a number, and maybe that item sits there, and like a year later, it's now got like 2,000 or 3,000, whereas maybe at first, like no one wanted that. But as the space changes, a desire for something might come up, and there's going to be a certain point where the artist is. If you've ever played a board game where there's a card there, and when that card gets skipped because no one wants it, you put like some kind of like money or currency on it, right? So artist is like, oh, I don't want to do that, but you keep putting more people that say I want this or I need this, then he's like, all right, now I'll do it.
Yeah, it's basically like as time goes by, there's more of an incentive. I think that's a really difficult question. Like I don't know if Ben or I are the best, in fact, to answer that from an economic standpoint. I don't know unless you have another opinion on it.
No, I agree.
Other than it being a really good idea.
I think, yeah, I mean, we're going to need, definitely going to need mechanisms in place for artists to, I mean, on the one hand, it's create whatever you want. On the other hand, it's create things that sell, right? And personally, I think there's going to be a mix of both, and I think there's, as developers need things, I think it's a great idea to have a place for them to be able to express that, and then artists can come in, and we want the ecosystem to grow, and I think that's a perfect way of doing it.
Yeah, I think the other weird part about it too is like you might be really interested in doing something, and you might love a certain genre, and you might hate another genre, and we already know there's so much diversity that you might think something is so boring, and that like no one would ever want to do this, and then you're gonna find 20 people that love that. Like that's their jam. They love building this kind of stuff. They're very particular about stuff, or they want stuff to be super accurate. And it's really interesting watching how unique some of this stuff is. And like I would actually be surprised if people said, "Hey, I want this," and there wasn't someone currently out there, whether they know about our product or not, that isn't like, "I love collecting this stuff. I love modeling this stuff." So I think a lot of people will be surprised at how big this community already is.
So it's a very diverse and spread out community. So it's very large, but it doesn't. So if you're like interested in a certain niche, it feels like a small community because your niche is like 5 people working on it.
Yeah, unless the niche is like sword and board or like sci-fi, which is huge. Yeah, like a lot of the other stuff, like some of those niches are pretty tight knit, but it's international, right? Like we have people across the entire world producing content today, and things sometimes feel like you might be the only person, but there might be 50 other people in the world that really love this stuff, and that's all it takes. It's all it takes to be able to produce this kind of stuff, which is pretty fascinating.
How did Morph 3D find those people, and how does it continue to do so?
Well, for starters, Morph 3D started reaching out, obviously, to the artist network that exists with Daz, and then as we've just been growing our brand, reaching out, we go to events, go to GDC and VRDC and SAVR, and we've been meeting with more and more artists, and we have hundreds of artists that have reached out to us thus far just to want to make things for the Morph 3D product suite.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting too, because Artist Tools actually, like our original content when we built for MCS was actually all internal. There was no tooling. It was actually a very slow process, and it required a lot of work. It was really expensive, even from our own company, and it was really expensive.
Took about a week to do an asset.
Yeah, and so it's one full outfit, several people involved in that, five days, and these are people that know what they're doing. They know how to create this stuff. This isn't even including the modeling, which is crazy, because so you have that in addition. And what's interesting is we had people that caught wind that Morph might open up, because originally people thought, oh, it's going to be all of our own content, and we never wanted that. We always wanted to expand and open, and we had people begging to both either from Daz, or they didn't have an interest in Daz, but they have an interest in real time, or they have an interest in VR, or they're building something that they're using our current tech, and they were like, how do I get a piece of content in your tool? They were like dying for it. And so Artist Tools is the solution that we ended up building, and for a lot of people, they were very, very happy with that. And so it's interesting now, because now you can do it yourself, and eventually, very, very soon, we're going to have it so that you can distribute that on our ecosystem, because right now it's only consumable on your own.
Yep. So let's take a moment and step away from the content creator side and kind of look at the end user side of this content being created. So for Ready Room, do you think that there could be an issue with if people are like easily able to tweak their avatars, that they could develop like an unrealistic or unhealthy image of themselves?
Ooh, that is a tough question. Yes, I do.
Sure, yeah.
I think everybody has their own opinion about like how you see yourself, and I don't want us to come in and say this is how it should be. Whether if you want to be a certain gender or race or ability or height or whatever, like I don't think we are the place to limit that. But I do think that there's a potential for damage from people. Of they might want to be somebody that they're not really. And I think as VR and AR develops, especially VR, I really think that we're going to have this problem. And I don't know if we can help that problem. And I think it would be really good for people to start discussing this stuff now.
Yep.
Because it wouldn't surprise me if
Yeah.
people are in therapy a year from today about this type of problem.
Sure, but I also have to look on the bright side of it, right? Of this, it to me, I think, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna have my character, and maybe I wear armor around and I have a dragon that sits on my shoulder, and that's really cool, and maybe that's how I envision myself in a virtual world, and that makes me happy, and I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. I think you could always find a downside to it, but I think that there's going to be a lot of positives in terms of letting people express themselves for how they want to express themselves, right? And for all we know, in the real world, there might be certain places where they live or certain situations where they don't feel like they can express themselves. And so then the virtual world suddenly becomes an outlet for that. And that can be a very good place for that. It gives them kind of this ability to what they consider to kind of be themselves, or a version of themselves that they want to be. And I don't necessarily think that that's bad. I think that can be good for people to have that outlet.
And so how long do you think it'll take for, say 100,000 people to have a VR avatar representation of themselves?
Hopefully not long.
I definitely know that, like, our own technology, we've already kind of designed like how we would get there, and
Yep.
we already have a means to answer that. As far as getting an adoption base, I think the first thing is the units have to get cheaper.
Yep.
I think that's one of the biggest barriers of entry. I think when we have things like PlayStation VR, that's sort of going down the right approach. And Gear VR, I think my personal gripe with mobile devices currently is positional tracking, or lack thereof. And I think the first company that hits that, because we already know Gear VR did wildly. It's very successful. Lots of people developed for it. The units have sold really well. But 100,000 people, and that's a lot of people.
Well, and I think a lot of it is going to come from the amount of content that we have to offer. I think that's one of the biggest incentives, right? Like, people are going to come as they see that there's thousands, tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of items that they can choose from, right? And it's not this limited piece. And I think that's what's going to, like, not only headsets becoming cheaper, but also that we are working on having our Ready Room experience working on mobile, and that's something that we have in our pipeline, and we want the ability to have that available even like on a Gear VR for people. And so that's definitely where we see that mobile adoption is big, and so we're moving in that direction. And then at the same time, we're hoping that the higher end headsets can become cheaper, and that more adoption can come from that angle as well.
Who do you think is going to power, this adoption of, I need a virtual avatar of myself now? Do you think it's going to be TSA, Facebook, narcissism?
These are hard questions. I think Facebook is probably the most likely to succeed from an honest viewpoint, just because they have such a huge platform already. It's really easy for them to push content. I don't know though. I think the other possible might be a AAA, a AAA game developer, someone like Blizzard coming in and announcing, like, hey, we built Overwatch MMO. A lot of people are interested in it, and guess what? It's in VR. And I think you would have, if you have a player like that, people don't care. They'll clamor, they'll beg, they'll borrow, and they'll get these units.
So you think it's existing franchises as they move into the space with their fan base? Like,
I think either that or a social platform. That's my
Yeah.
That's where I would
agree
put
with
my money.
Yeah, I agree.
oh man, this question is this the first steps towards becoming eternal in the digital world? So we can imagine that if you sprinkle a little machine learning, over everything someone does, as we get more and more data and information on a person, you could then use AI to mimic them. So then you can interact with people in VR after they've died. What does this mean for grieving? And is it a part of the process, or does it replace it in some way?
Wow, there's that's another tough one. One of my favorite books actually is by an author called John Scalzi, and he wrote a book called Old Man's War. I don't want to ruin the book in case anybody's listening that wants to read it, but the gist is that one of the parts is there's a way to transfer consciousness, or there's a way to capture that, and I think that's a really common science fiction trope, and I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having that at some point. I wouldn't put it past us to figure out the brain, but even then, that's light years, right? I think from today, I think that would be really interesting. In fact, Ben has worked on stuff that's directly related to this. If he wants to talk about it, and I think from I don't know how you would deal with that. Like, what happens when you see, let's say, a deceased spouse or a child that died? How do you cope with that? I don't think anybody has an answer for that right now, because even there are people that will watch tapes of loved ones after they're gone, and there's no way to interact with them. They're not asking questions back or talking to you. And the second that we know how you would respond to a question, that's kind of a scary thought. Yeah. Like that's you start questioning, like, what makes a human a human. Yeah. I don't know if
what is consciousness?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very philosophical question.
How deep do we want this podcast to get? Honestly, personally, my viewpoint is I think it's very exciting. Like Jesse said, I have spent time working on this type of giving people maybe this ability to have that type of experience. And personally, if I had a loved one that passed away, I would want to. I think I would very much want to be able to hold on to that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, in the same way that people can, they watch videos and they imagine, what it would have been like if Grandpa was there at the graduation or something like that. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I think others would completely disagree with me, but for me personally, I would thoroughly enjoy that, and I kind of hope actually that we kind of get to a point like that to where we can kind of stick around after we're gone, and be maybe an influence on our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, and just kind of they can know how we were in our day, in the same way that I wish I could meet my great great grandpa and see how he was. And I think it's a very powerful thing that could be used in a good way, and in theory could also be used in a bad way, just like anything.
Yeah, I think that's kind kind of I would say most people kind of have that kind of immortalization, either through human nature of just having children, or having a lineage or things like that. And I think there's a very strong human desire for that. But I'm really concerned about, we've already kind of reached that point of like, when I see an image, I don't know if that image is real anymore. Like, I don't know if that's been Photoshopped. We're getting to the point where we can recreate things. There was a really, I wish I knew the guys off the top of my head. They created a technology where they could take video and move their mouse and make someone else talk. And it was very believable. Wow. And they could splice together and creatively edit, and they were getting people to say words, but it was video that people kind of knew it was going to go that way. And so what happens when you do that, but it's all fake, right? What happens when a government has access to this kind of technology? Like, what can you believe? So I don't know. But Ben's an optimist. I'm a little bit more of a pessimist in some of this stuff. So
It's true.
Nice. So let's go ahead and move on to some lighter material.
Thank goodness.
So Morph 3D recently announced a partnership with Bold Metrics. So if you want to go into, what is Bold Metrics, what do they do, and why were they a good fit for Morph 3D?
Yeah, so Bold Metrics is a company that is primarily working with the fashion industry right now. They have software that is actually very remarkable. You essentially answer 5 questions about yourself: your height, your waist, your age, shoe size, couple other questions like that, and then they're able to, with the software that they've built, return back to you your tailor sizes, as if you would have gone to a tailor to get custom clothing made. So we've partnered with them we felt like it was a really good fit, that now we can integrate that with our avatars, and we can shape our avatars and change them to fit exactly. So if I'm a 32-inch waist, I can have my avatar be a 32-inch waist, and he can be 5'9" and have a shoe size of 9, and he can literally be a 1-for-1 representation of you. And so our partnership with them is looking at the fashion industry and realizing that we have all of this content, that why can't we show or be in a world where we can see digital versions of clothing, and maybe I'm in a virtual dressing room and I'm trying on clothing, or an augmented dressing room, right? And I'm trying on clothing. I can see how it would be on me, and that's kind of what we're going after there.
And so, do you think it's more for another part of the process for creating your virtual avatar? Or can we also see some kind of technology in stores where I don't even have to try on clothes to see, like, what does this shirt look like on me? And then you just know it fits because it's scanned you, it knows your size. So what are your comments on that?
yeah, I think we'll probably see practical applications very quickly. I would be really surprised if there aren't people that are trying to do this today, because there's such a high cost of just having return rates. I think what happens is a lot of people end up going and buying brands because they know the brands fit, and they know this brand is a size 6 and that brand is a size 2, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And even on men's clothing, they cheat all the time too. And I think what will happen is there's a drive top down to deliver this stuff because they can save money. And if you can go in and and you're like, oh, I love that t-shirt, I think it's really cool, and then you put it on your avatar and you're like, well, actually it doesn't really fit that well on my body, or maybe I just don't like the way it pinches my shoulders or whatever, and so you choose a different shirt that maybe works better for you. And I think that's where it's going to go very, very quickly.
I mean, let's be honest. Who likes to go into a changing room in a store. You go into a department store and you pick out 10 different items of clothing. And how long are you in the changing room? Taking off your clothes, putting on the clothes again, taking off the clothes, putting on the clothes again, looking in the mirror every time, seeing if you like it and if you don't like it. It seems like a great option to just swipe left or right to go to the next shirt and kind of see how it looks. Or maybe that's kind of your preliminary of, I want to find things that look good together. I want to find clothes that match. And then from there, maybe then I go and try on the actual clothing, but maybe I don't have to try on 12 different things. Maybe I now only have to try on 2 because I've already seen how they look from the digital representation. And so it just saved me time and made my experience a lot better.
So with you guys are in a very unique position as far as what you're doing and the types of markets that you're hitting with your technology. Do you see any competitors in your space? Or do you feel like what Morph is doing is completely unique compared to anyone else?
It would be very naive to say that there's no competition. I think we have a huge leg up on what a lot of people are trying to do. I think in the regards, because we have evolved from DAS, there is a huge powerhouse behind that. That is good for our business. It's good for people that want to integrate with our stuff. And it makes it really hard to compete with us. Really, really, really difficult. And I think because we're so focused on making sure our stuff works really well in AR and VR, and that's where there's a big push and a big trend. And I think a lot of these other companies, you have to be a big company to try and compete, I think, at this point. And there are options. There are people, and I would like to hope that we will always outperform them, because DAS hasn't done it in the past. There's a very clear history of DAS doing a wonderful job of, sorry to the competition for DAS, but they have destroyed them. They have just demolished them, and they continue to do a better job, and they continue to produce better content, and they continue to develop new technology, and Morph is going to do the same thing.
Well, I think it also comes down to just the amount of content, right? Like, we just barely spent the last 6 months or so creating a pipeline for converting existing DAS content to be compatible with the Morph system, and we're slowly releasing that now. And we've made announcements that we're going to be releasing more and more as time goes on. And there's tens of thousands of assets that are going to be coming through this pipeline and being released. And that's really hard to compete with. I mean, the technology is one thing, but the content is another thing that is very time consuming and very difficult to do. And to have right out of the gate tens of thousands of items that are available, that's a pretty decent leg up in our opinion.
Yeah, it's very expensive to get to that position. And yeah, Ben's right. Even technology alone, if we just push that off to the side, it's really hard to compete with our content.
And so now that you've built this platform, what kind of companies have you seen come to you asking to either work with you, or they have a specific use case they want to do? So examples being like a movie studio, people who just want to model themselves, or even like the porn industry coming to you and just wanting one-to-one models of their models.
Yeah, I think the first people that came to us was definitely social VR. Those types of application right up our alley. They needed avatars. They're hard to make. They wanted them to be customizable, and it's hard to make customizable avatars, and it's really hard to make them quickly and cheaply. And I think our technology and base Morph set solved a lot of those problems for them. And I would say that's probably the first people that came to us. I think the second group might be the video game industry, especially indie devs. In fact, when Morph was released, the indie devs were very interested in it. When we released our avatars on Unity in their asset store, people were taking existing DAZ content and they were like stumbling trying to get figures out of DAZ, bring them into Unity, make them work. And so when we came and released an avatar that just worked well, as a developer, I would love to think that all of the initial releases work really well, but they just, as we refined things, the avatars got better and things just keep getting better. And I think for the porn industry, though, that's something that we will have to stay away from because it's just not really the focus that we want to take the company.
We're about putting clothes on is kind of our take, and so why are you going to go spend money on a digital shirt if you're just going to take it off? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of tech that's involved in getting that clothing on you, so we're very proud of that, so we want to showcase that.
Now, Ben, Jesse, I'm sure our audience, a lot of them are in different parts of their career. Now, could you talk a little bit about your background and what you did in your schooling and your early professional life, what led up to being hired by Morph 3D?
Yeah, I'll go first. So, like a lot of developers, my background is unique. I was a Middle Eastern Studies graduate and got into programming several years ago and fell in love with it, realized I was actually really good at it. And my journey with VR and AR started maybe 2 years ago, and just getting more and more involved in the AR and VR communities was the start, and then from there, buying as much hardware as I could and starting to develop applications for it, and really trying to understand what was going on with the VR and AR industry as I saw this up and coming giant, as I like to think of it, something that is going to be huge. And so then it just worked out that Morph 3D found me and saw that I was interested in VR. They wanted to go in the direction of VR, and so it just worked out that now I get to do VR and AR on a daily basis as my job, instead of as a hobby and in doing it in my spare time as I did before.
How did Morph 3D find you?
So I was a co-organizer of the Utah VR meetup, and we would do events, and my current boss, Burke Fry, would start going to those events, and he found me at one of those and offered me a job, and now I'm at Morph. So go to the meetups. Go to VR meetups. They're very useful.
Yeah, actually, like I can't stress that enough. Like all of these like social clubs and like meetups are super valuable, regardless of what region you might be in. All set? So for me, I have a more traditional background. So I started programming at a really, really young age, and just I don't know what was wrong with me. Just really liked it, and I was your very typical antisocial kind of shut in, and I just really enjoyed programming, and I was really involved in the Linux community a long time ago, and I had a mutual friend who was interested in doing a startup. This is right before the internet burst, like the .com just collapsed. And I graduated high school right as that happened, and I was just kind of devastated because people were getting signing bonuses, and there was just so much money to be made in it. On top of, you just had to be passionate. And what was interesting to me is that the people that were programming at that time in early 2000s, late 90s were geeks. Like they were people that were just, I hope I'm not offending anybody that programmed during that era, but it seemed like a lot of people were just really into it. It was just a kind of a certain culture. You kind of had to have a certain mindset. And I think that's diversified for every positive way, because programming just should be something that I think lots of people should get to experience. And anyway, this friend I had was involved in startup, and so I was just involved in failed startup after failed startup after failed startup. I probably have failed at least 8 startups. So I don't know why Morph hired me, because I have a bad track record. But he was my friend, Tim, had a mutual friend, John, and John is one of the VPs at DAS 3D. And that's how I became involved in it, because on top of that, I was really involved in 3D programming in the early 2000s. It was probably 2000 and 2001 that I was really into OpenGL development. And a few years ago, I got really into WebGL for a period of time. And when this opportunity came up, I dropped my freelancing career and I didn't care about the money because it was way more interesting. So that's where I am today.
Nice. So do you have any last comments for artists or developers who might be looking to use Morph?
The only thing I can say honestly is that it's a developing platform, and I think we did a terrible job in the past of embracing what people had to say about stuff. I think we really failed as a unit to hear what people had to say and take what they were talking about and basically helping us build a company and a platform that people wanted. And I think that's well, I know for a fact it's changing. And as our division, as Morph is growing and as our community is growing, people's opinions about our products and where they would like to see the company go and what types of problems that they want us to solve is very valuable for us to hear. And I love solving hard problems. And so when someone presents problem to me, like my first inclination is to go, I want to fix it. So for anybody that's listening that is worried about, well, how does the community, like, can you talk to us? We're not that big. And the answer for that is absolutely, you can talk to us. And I want people to know that if you want to invest in our platform, that we're receptive and that we're going to listen to what you have to say. And in many cases, we'll help you out.
Yeah, and to also keep in mind what we're doing, we have a lot of very ambitious goals, and we're working very hard to meet them. And like Jesse said, we want feedback. We want to hear what people have to say, what they like and what they don't like, and we recognize that we don't have all the answers, and we definitely lean on the community to give us feedback and to help us as we grow this entire ecosystem together.
I have one last question. Where do you see augmented and virtual reality in 10 years, and where do you see yourself?
I think it'll be a really amazing thing in 10 years, honestly. Going from, I really like hardware. In fact, I like programming on hardware. I like building shaders and that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting to me to see, I felt like hardware was somewhat stagnant. I felt like Intel had a hold of the world. I remember the last time I bought an AMD, it was, someone's going to correct me on this, I think it was called a Thunderbird or something like that. It was a big slot thing. I think it was the same time that P2 came out. I felt like that was the last time AMD entered the market and had any kind of real competitive push. And I feel like things like processors have stagnated. Like, they've gotten better, but marginal improvements. In the last couple of years, the graphics cards are so amazingly better, just monumentally better. They've just exploded. And not only did they get better, but they got cheaper. And so I think the only thing that's really holding the hardware back at this point is batteries. And I know there are companies like Tesla that, I mean, if you solve better batteries, that's like hundreds of billions of dollars.
You rule the world.
Yeah, you probably will rule the world. It'll probably be one of the next biggest advancements. I think that and medical. And I think for AR and VR, what's going to happen, the reason why I'm bringing up hardware is that the stuff just keeps getting better. Like, I remember using the DK1 And I was blown away. It was a really, really cool experience. But at the same time, when you look at it, the fidelity wasn't that great. Like there were problems with it. And when you look at the current units that are out there today, like I'm blown away at how good this stuff is. And it's not stopping advancement. So in 10 years, I think you're going to have VR in homes. I think it's going to be just as proliferated as a gaming console. And I think you're going to see not just video games completely revolutionized, but you're going to see practical applications from all fields.
Yep. And I think, I mean, in the same way that right now, can we imagine life without a smartphone? Right? It's actually very difficult. But yet you go back 10 years and it didn't exist. And so I think you're going to see the same thing. I think 10 years from now, people are going to have their augmented and virtual reality and mixed reality devices, and you're going to start to wonder what life was like before them, right? You're going to start to forget, like, oh yeah, when I was building a house 10 years ago, oh yeah, we didn't put on headsets and try to figure out the plans that we were going to do. But 10 years from now, that's going to just be normal, and that's what you do. And I think it's very exciting.
I completely agree, especially about the graphic cards. Like today, even between my 1080 and my 1080 Ti, just a couple days ago, I just got the Ti, and what an incredible difference, even that little bit of an upgrade. I mean, yeah, where it's going to go is incredible.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see Magic Leap in 10 years. Maybe. We'll see.
What do you think, what would they be doing?
Well, I don't know who knows what they're doing. I mean, like, I think everybody's heard rumors about what those things are doing, but I think what will happen is, like, I remember when Google Glass, was it Google Glass? That was the thing that people were kind of joking about, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And I remember when it came out, it was fairly revolutionary, and people had this, like, pushback. It was like, we don't want this. Like, I remember there were places where they put up signs almost like discriminating against people that were wearing these things. And it's funny because, you know, the technology existed before where people didn't like being recorded. And I think it's inevitable that we're going to have wearable computers. I remember even when I was younger and I went to Linux World in 2000 or 2001, one of the people that was there was wearing wearables. I mean, it was a giant backpack. It was just absolutely ridiculous. It was like webcams taped to his head. And it's the same thing. And then you go look at people that are getting on planes and they have, you know, they put magnets in their fingers and they're going through scanners. And I think that stuff will be commonplace. And so a company like Magic Leap, I think if they pull it off and it looks good and it's wearable and you can wear it every day, like, that vision of what the world will be, that's Pandora's box. And I think it's so hard to lose your cell phone at this point. Like, I could do without having a cell phone for a day or two, but I don't know. Once you start putting on gear permanently, I don't think you can walk away from that. I think and it's so practical too.
You're going to start to depend on it more in the same way that we depend on our smartphones now.
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting world. Definitely different than it is today.
Well, I just want to thank you guys for coming on the show. It's been great having you. I'm Craig Herndon. This is the Virtuality Podcast, and we'll see you in this reality
and the next. Thank you so much for listening. We would like to keep sharing more about VR and AR with you, so please consider a few dollars to our Patreon, linked in the show notes. The Virtuality Podcast is produced by Jason Parks and music by Rachel Dazinski. This podcast is in collaboration with Boston VR and Boston AR. Monthly meetups and events can be found on meetup.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @virtualitycast and learn more at our website, virtuality.show.